very warm welcome to all of you for this panel on the importance of male allies. Thank you very much as well, of course, to Arnold Clark for supporting today's session. As most of you know, Arnold Clark recently supported the International Women's Football Tournament, the Arnold Clark Cup, which of course England won. Well done. Thank you very much. I don't know why I'm saying thank you. I wasn't on the field. I'm Faye Carruthers. I wasn't on the field because I'm a broadcaster. I work for TalkSport predominantly. I do their flagship game day coverage as well as a variety of different other things. But you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to these wonderful people. We're active on social, by the way, as everybody's been saying today. So make sure that you join the conversation. You can use our hashtags, which are WIFBEinspired and Women in Football. Also, can you switch your phones to silent if you haven't done already? I've just had to remind myself to do it as well. We really hope that this session's going to be interactive and you'll have questions that we can answer, and we'll have some time afterwards for that. But let me welcome our panellists first and foremost, shall I? So second from the right is Paul Barber, Chief Executive and Deputy Chairman of Brighton and Hove Albion Football Club. Just if you don't know who Paul is, where have you been? He's had a stellar career, including C-suite and director level roles at the FA, Tottenham Hotspur and the Vancouver Whitecaps as well. That was all, of course, before joining Brighton in 2012. And as well as his role at Brighton, Paul, of course, sits on the board of Women in Football. He's had several high-level committee positions at the FA and a massive impact on all of the organisations that he's worked for. But for the moment, what I do want to say about Paul is that I know from conversations with him that driving diversity and inclusion in football sits really close in his heart. It's something very important to him, and his board appointment with WIF came from his own passion and commitment. So Paul, if I start with you on a very broad question, really, what exactly is a male ally?
It's a good question. I mean, I think in its simplest form it is about removing barriers and giving talented people the opportunity to achieve and to progress and to reach the levels that they need to reach. And I think, you know, I've been driven to support WIF for a number of reasons. First of all, 25 years ago nearly, I worked with Hope Powell, who is a fantastic pioneer in women's football. And frankly, I'd come up through the lower levels of football, not being a great player and not making it as a coach, totally focused on men's football, boys' football. And when I first met Hope, I kind of realised for the first time how difficult it was for her as the England coach to even put on a training session. And I remember during one of my early roles at the FA, Hope pretty much kicking down my door and saying, "We're training this week, we've got 4 balls. And we're the England national team." And I was just shocked, to be honest, Faye, at how little support in those days the FA provided for women's football. And, you know, here was someone who'd played the game, played 50, 60 times for England, knew more about the game than I did, was better qualified to coach than I was, who was really passionate about what she was doing. And yet there was this huge barrier in front of her to being successful. And that just, at that time, felt uncomfortable, still feels uncomfortable when I think about it. And then I married someone who was a big football fan, so she had a view. And then I had 2 daughters who ended up as football fans, and they've got a view. And now I'm in a female-dominated household. And it's a bit like this conference, a bit like a giant version of my house. During lockdown, in the early days before lockdown, there was me and the dog, and he and I were good. We were dominant. And then all of a sudden, the girls came back, and suddenly the balance of power shifted. But seriously, it is an important opportunity when you're in the higher levels of a football club to be able to remove barriers and give people opportunities. And if you don't do that for women, let's just talk about gender for a second, then you're missing a huge amount of talent in my job. If you close your eyes to the talent that exists amongst women, and this room and the bigger room has shown that there's a lot, then frankly it makes your job as the chief executive of a football club even harder. So for me it's about removing barriers, very simply.
You remove those barriers yourself, but how do you go about removing them within your organisation? Because obviously we all know what football can be like, and there are some indoctrinated views that take a little while to change. So what have you managed to do at Brighton? Well,
you've got to speak up. You've sometimes got to challenge, and this isn't just in gender issues, it's diversity generally. You have got to be prepared to take a stand sometimes and to question things and to challenge things and encourage others to do the same. And I think if you can set an example from someone at my age, then younger managers, younger executives, male executives hopefully take a lead from that. And in a generation, hopefully less, there won't be the barriers. And football clubs are changing massively, particularly Premier League clubs. We're seeing a lot more gender diversity. We're seeing more diversity generally, not enough, not fast enough, but it's changing, and we've got to continue. I mean, this fella's been campaigning for years for change in terms of diversity, and we're still having to push those boundaries and push those barriers down. Still not enough's done. Still not enough people are taking up the challenge, but we've got to start somewhere, and it's important that we don't block out talent in whatever form it is from wherever it comes from.
Well, bearing in mind you mentioned this fella, I think we should probably introduce him formally, shall we? It's Troy Townsend. He's the head of player engagement at football's equality and inclusion charity Kick It Out, of course. Core focus in Troy's role is to deliver education within professional football's academy structure on racism and discrimination. Troy's actually got to rush off to Liverpool at 15:15, so don't think he's rude. He said, please don't make a big deal of it, but I don't think you can just sidle off to the right, Troy, without anyone noticing. So I'll just say it now, and then we'll get to talk to you as well, because I know many people are going to want to hear what you've got to say. And the reason he's going to Liverpool is because he's just joined the Liverpool Foundation Advisory Board, whilst also creating his first audio documentary podcast called It Was All a Dream, The Football Academy Journey, which if you've not heard yet, please do. Various accolades for Troy throughout his working life, as you'd expect, with the most prestigious being selected as one of the FA's 150 grassroots heroes, which included a visit to Buckingham Palace to receive his award from Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge. He's also received 2 awards for the Football Blacklist, which focuses and celebrates the contributions of black people working in football. If you've not met Troy, I know you won't get a chance to speak to him today, but engage with him for sure. He's got some fascinating stories. And Troy, you've been a male ally to many people in this room. What does it mean to you to be that?
Do you mind if I say I struggle with the question, male ally? And the only reason I struggle is because it's almost part of my DNA. It's part of who I am. It's part of, providing opportunity, putting people, connecting people together. Many say from underrepresented groups, but women are not underrepresented, are they? And it's just the kind of space I've been in where women have helped me develop in my career, particularly in this stage of my career. I was a former teacher before, and we're friends. We're friends. I don't use the term ally at that stage. Many have helped me get to the places I need to get to and introduced me to the many people that have. And I don't know, if that is classed as an ally, then great. But I just find it difficult with the term because football is supposed to be this open space as such. But if we properly nail it down, then we know that it isn't. I run an event, or have run events called Raise Your Game for Kick It Out. And I remember, I think it was about 2014, big event at the Emirates. It's around mentoring, it's around helping people who aspire to work in the football industry through all these different disciplines, apart from playing on the field of play, to try and get a foothold into the game. Media is one of the biggest areas that we kind of have, but coaching, business, all those types of stuff, refereeing as well. And I remember the first event that I was kind of properly involved in and ran myself. There's 250 people, young people in a room, and when we did the stats, it was 9% of women were attending on that day. So I wanted to nail into what that was. Why is it? There's a massive amount of women that want to work in football, that see football as an opportunity for them to utilise the skills that they've learnt to get on the journey and the ladder. And why wouldn't you, by the way? It's a great industry to work in when it's going well. And we nailed it down, and there was a fear. There was a fear about being in this male-dominated environment, even in a room or a big conference suite. There was a fear about being themselves, having their identity almost exposed because of the things that they'd heard in the game. So we created a women's only event, very similar to this, probably this size, to be totally honest. Wanted it small, wanted it unique. We wanted people to share their stories. And it's grown from there. It's grown, and in a sense, it's grown. It's provided a platform for many to begin their careers. So I'm really proud of what we've achieved and how we just look at people for the qualities that they have rather than because of their identity. And I think far too often in our game, people are looked at with their identity, and people don't break that identity down and match the qualities that they have. So I'm not sure if I've answered it properly, Faye. I've gone round and round and round, but for me, it's what Paul said. It's providing that opportunity. It's providing a platform. It's being there when someone needs you. It's understanding the conversation that's coming that way as well, because you can be there, someone's talking to you and saying that the difficulties that they're having in the industry, but not understand it.
Yeah.
And as a male, you think, well, I never had that problem. You know what? I must admit, I have had that problem as a black man. But, it's about understanding that as well and proactively being available.
Yeah, I think that's really key. I was at that event, by the way, at the Emirates, and it was very, very male-dominated. I remember, I think Reshman was hosting it.
Yeah, that was the one, yeah.
And it felt quite oppressive in many ways for any women who were going there. And it's really key what you say there, because I think sometimes when you think male ally, you automatically, the semantics suggest that actually it's men pulling women up and helping them out like that, and that's actually not what it is. It's mutually beneficial. I've got amazing male allies in my career, in my personal life as well, and it's reciprocal for sure. Another question for you, Troy. We hear the phrase intersectionality quite a lot. You're smiling already. Can you explain exactly what it means and what the particular challenges facing black and brown women in football are?
I can explain what it means. It's from my perspective, because it will mean something different probably to everybody in this room. We all have an identity. I don't think what we appreciate is we all have multifacets to that identity. And that's where intersectionality comes from, because, yes, I'm a black man if I identify myself. My parents are from the West Indies. My grandparents were shipped to Scotland, so I have identity in Scotland as well, so I have Scottish blood in me. It's not obvious, but it is. But if we then align that to the protected characteristics, I have a disability because of my hip. So all of a sudden, I'm touching many, many touch points in those areas that actually then enable me, unfortunately, to receive the kind of abuse that I try and talk about all the time. So I could be because I'm black, I could be because I'm Scottish, and people will have a look at me and laugh at me and want to think, well, how can this black guy be Scottish? And it could be because I have a disability. So it's the components of who we are. It makes up who we are. And I think we've got to realise a lot more that we have this multifaceted identity as well. The combination of what all that may be, to realise that many of us, most of us, all of us, don't just sit in one box. I don't want to put anyone in a box, by the way, but we don't all sit in one box. We have these shared characteristics. And unfortunately in my field, like I say, those shared characteristics open you up to a little bit more abuse. The black and brown conversation is one I could keep you going all day if you want, and I'll stay past 1:15 if you want me to for that. Opportunities have been created. There's no denying that. You look on our screens, you look in various areas of our industry, particularly, let me talk from the male side of the point of view, because that's where I'm in, and I see opportunities. But people of colour, and I'll say this now, particularly dark-skinned black people, there still seems to be this barrier, this obstacle, this almost like, and I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth, I'll say it, it's almost like you're too dark to be the person on the screen. You're not the kind of fit that we want to see parading in our environment. And I say that with confidence because that's what people speak to me about. So a lighter shade is acceptable. A darker shade is going to have to work that little bit harder again.
Wow. To
potentially receive the opportunity that everyone else is getting, no matter how skilled that woman would be. Now, that is a lot to unpick for anybody in a room today, but it's something that's been highlighted more and more and more. And so there's another barrier now we need to break down. This is amazing, by the way. And the growth of women in football over the years that I've been involved. I remember going to an event probably about 6 years ago in a small room, 30 people. Now look, you're filling conference halls, and there's so many amazing people connected to the organisation. And I would say that there's another step to go. And there's another step to go. And that identification of why various identities of females are still being almost like pushed to the back of the queue for opportunities. I'm not a politician. I don't like to be a politician. I don't pronounce to be a politician. But we've seen it with Ukraine, and we've seen it when black people are trying to escape the atrocity that's going on there, where they're kind of pitched. I told you I could talk about this topic, didn't I?
Yeah, we're happy to listen.
But yeah, that's kind of my general thoughts. We have another stage to go in that open door process of allowing women to come into the industry. The great role models that there are already in the industry, by the way. I mean, Eni Aluku was mentioned from the outset on the main stage, and yes, Eni is one of a number of women who have progressed their careers and have done so well and is now out in America. But how many women look like Eni that have been part of that journey as well, or have that journey up there? So yeah, that's kind of what I say. I say that there's another stage to go for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And you know, I'm not comparing this in the slightest, but certainly my personal experiences of broadcast in particular, and by the way, we're not just talking about you know, people being visible on screen. There has to be, from the top down, different people involved in football. From a broadcasting point of view, how many overweight women do you see on screen? You just don't. That's something that has to change at boardroom level, rather than people being pigeonholed and put in boxes and not allowed, you know, because they don't fit. You know, we could sit here and go on about all of these things forever, couldn't we? Let's introduce Charlotte, though, because she's head of women's football at football media organisation Copper 90. Tom Thirlwell was supposed to be here, but Charlotte has ably stepped in at the last minute, which is wonderful. Tom sends his best. He unfortunately tested positive for COVID yesterday and was gutted not to be here. But Charlotte is here instead. Head of women's football at Copper 90. Copper 90, if you don't know what it is, by the way, harnesses the ability to build genuine fan connections and play a role in the extraordinary growth of the women's game. And Charlotte helps brands find their role in driving the game forward. I'm just going to give you a bit of I hate it when people talk about you like this, because you could just tell people this, but I'll do it in the official way, shall I? Charlotte has spent her career developing brand partnerships with sports and media industry leaders such as TalkSport, the Football Association and Sports Revolution as well. During her time here at the FA, Charlotte actually worked on growing the women's and girls' game, and the experience inspired her to launch Her Move, which is a dynamic digital publication dedicated to creating inclusive, accessible and responsible health and fitness content for women, which is absolutely fantastic. You've worked in the football industry for 15 years, Charlotte, mainly under male management as well. So you offer a different perspective with this in terms of male allyship.
Yeah, it's interesting because actually I was the one that put my hat in the ring, should I say, for taking Tom's place. Just as if it wasn't for male allyship, I definitely wouldn't be where I am today. But it's interesting because if you think about why that is it because of male allies, or is it because those in charge or those who have been in senior leadership positions have been men? Therefore, just it so happens they're the ones that have broken down the barriers for me. So it's quite interesting to explore that, and actually if it had been women in that position, would I still be where I am? Actually, possibly, but because if you think about how many women there are, I think the latest survey or report from Fair Game said that there was like 4% to 11% of women on boards in football clubs. So actually, why do you need to help male allies? Because they're the ones in the positions to break down barriers for you.
It's really interesting when you think about it like that. Certainly down in the Championship, there's barely any women on boards. It's absolutely shocking. So in that case, how would somebody go about finding a male ally in an organisation? And do you approach them directly? So there might be people here who think, I'm not sure whether there's anybody in my organisation I would trust to go and talk to.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was kind of obviously I knew the questions last night, but was thinking about it a lot in terms of what is a male ally. And obviously you've kind of got on one hand, like Paul was saying and Monique was saying in the talk earlier about people that can actually break down those barriers for you and offer you up for promotions. But actually thinking about it on a much more micro scale in terms of as a woman in football, and actually this is probably just a woman in work, there are so many times, and I think everyone here can relate, where you doubt yourself with, oh, should I be offended by that? Or I don't want to make a fuss, or they've asked me to make that cup of tea again, but you know what, I'm not going to kick up a fuss in the middle of a meeting, or I was very lucky to go on a World Cup trip when I was at Talksport. I won't name names, but I was the only woman on the trip. I was by no means the most senior or the most junior. I was there because I had sold 3 partnerships and got to take my clients. However, I was the one when we landed that got asked, oh, what do we do now? What's the schedule? What's the itinerary? And the whole way through, it was, oh, yeah, she's the woman here, so she knows what we're doing. But then a really beautiful example of like really subtle male allyship is actually a couple of the guys stepped up and said, oh, don't worry, we'll sort this out. Or, no, you shouldn't be going off and walking ahead and trying to find where the next bar we're going to or what the next restaurant is. You should be doing your job and entertaining your clients. We'll do that. And it's actually those kind of subtle moments where someone says, actually, you wrote this presentation, you should present it to the clients. Or, don't worry, we'll make the tea, or we'll do it. As actually like acting on it and thinking about the challenges that we face as women in sport, or women in work, and not only thinking about actually why have I asked them to do that, is it because of their ability, or is it because it's just my go-to to ask them to do that, and then actually acting on that as well and making sure that it's not just people in your team, but you are the one who's checking someone's okay, how do you feel about that, and thinking something through differently. So in terms of your question of how would you identify a male ally, I would actually look for the subtleties and the nuances. And actually don't be afraid to say to someone in your team, because they just wouldn't have thought about it, look, mate, actually it'd be really appreciative if in the next meeting you would offer to take the minutes. It's a really silly thing, but even in...
It's not a silly thing, it's a really important thing. Why should you be taking the minutes?
But in meetings where there is men and women of equal standing in every single organisation I've worked in, it's always the women that's gone, oh, don't worry, I'll just take the notes. And actually really nice to just a man who said, oh, I'll do that. And it seems like such a silly thing that they wouldn't necessarily think of. But I think it's okay to turn around to someone and say, actually, for this one, can you do this? Because it wouldn't necessarily come naturally. So whilst all the kind of bigger breaking down barriers is absolutely important, and using a position of privilege to help others is amazing, for me, it's actually those day-to-day, those moments where you're thinking, should I have got upset about that? Was that comment okay? If I've from working in sport for so long, and it's very banterful sales floors, it's probably the nicer way to put it.
That Talksport sales floor was very bantery,
yeah,
I remember. And I didn't go on that World Cup tour because they didn't send any female broadcasters out on that World Cup tour either.
Exactly. So, and then especially when I was younger, I think I look at it slightly different now, and actually it was Anna Kessel's Eat, Sweat, Play that made me actually think about how I positioned myself, or how I saw myself in sport differently, because I would just take it as banter, and I loved being one of the lads, and I would play up to that stereotype, and I would make sure that I did my revision for any game that we were taking clients to make sure that I knew as much as the next person, and I would take the comments about, oh, are you wearing that dress because of that client, or and you would just take it because it's banter. And actually, after reading Anna Kessel's Eat, Sweat, Play, and she talks about while you're down there, love, when she's plugging in her laptop, and actually that's not okay. You wouldn't go and say that to a woman down the street, would you? And that kind of gave me the confidence to sit back and say, right, I actually need to turn around and say, this isn't okay. But honestly, do I do that? Not as much as I should. Would I really appreciate it if a male ally turned around and was like, mate, that wasn't cool, or even better, took responsibility themselves and thought, before I say that, is that what I would say to my mum? Is that what I would say to my sister? And actually taking a bit more responsibility for your own actions. So I would love it if I didn't know who any of the male allies at my work were, because they were just doing it themselves without me knowing about it. And yeah,
it should be. I hate this word, so I'm sorry, but I can't think of another one off the top of my head. But it has to be organic.
Yeah,
it has to be like that.
Yeah, and little things make a really big difference, because we all love to overthink, right? And we'll all be like, oh, should I have been upset about that? Should that have? And actually having someone turn around and actually speak up for you, or say, were you okay about that? It validates how you felt, and therefore that then gives you the confidence to next time stand up and say something and kind of advocate for yourself and be your own ally too, which I think is really important, because we don't want to make a fuss. And especially like at the start of my career, I was so grateful to be there. Like, how cool was that? I was 18, 19 years old, working in Premier League football grounds. Like, you for having me. Like, oh no, it's okay, don't worry, say what you want, I'm just glad to be here. When actually now, a few years later, kind of realising that probably wasn't okay to be treated like that.
Yeah, I think we've all done that in the past, so I don't want to cloak everybody under the same umbrella, but certainly, you know, I've been complicit in those kind of things, and this is what Women in Football is here for. It's an empowerment. You know, the more of us that stand up and aren't doing that and are saying it's okay not to be, why are you just saying that that's okay, the better. Kieran's been sitting here so patiently. Kieran Theivam, everybody, is the Barclays FA WSL and FA Women's Championship Communications Manager for the FA, but he's covered the women's game for years, since 2011, so what, you're 11 years in to that, various roles, including with FIFA and the Athletic as well. If you've not read this book, then you should do. It was a fantastic book written in 2019 on the making of the Women's World Cup. So when it comes to male allyship, Kieran has truly walked the walk, is what is written in front of me. And I know he's walked the walk because I spent the 2019 Women's World Cup with him, and he definitely has. What's the FA doing, Kieran? You've obviously seen both sides of the coin, but what are the FA doing to kind of change things, and what more can they do?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I've worked on both sides. I've been fortunate to work as a journalist, so have probably scrutinised the FA, and now I'm part of the machine. But I think, you know, what better place or what better environment to be in to try and make change and try and make an impact. So I've been with the FA for just shy of 2 years, joined right in the middle of the pandemic, so as you can probably imagine, it was a baptism of fire when you walk in and one of the first things you're having to do is curtail a domestic women's season, because we obviously can't play any matches. But I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that has been important for me since coming into the FA, it's looking forward, but it's also recognising some of those individuals as we look back. And if you look at some of the work that we've done this season, we launched the Barclays FA WSL Hall of Fame, which looked to recognise those individuals that have played in the competition over the last 10 plus years. So Emma Hayes, Rachel Yankee, Kelly Smith and Farrah Williams were inducted at the start of this season, and that will be an annual thing that we do. And then obviously we had the 50th anniversary of the Vitality Women's FA Cup in December, obviously delayed final from May last year. And we wanted to recognise those individuals that maybe had felt they'd been forgotten about. So we had the very first two captains bring the trophy out. We had captains from previous finals attend on the day. You know, we really wanted to really recognise those individuals who paved the way and had helped us get to where we are now. Fast forward, I guess, looking forward, I mean, I guess there's probably two main examples that I can use just from the last week. Obviously, I'm sure you guys will have seen, and you know, about time, the prize fund for the Vitality Women's FA Cup has been increased, so that will benefit a huge number of clubs and individuals right across the pyramid, from the professional game down to the grassroots, and that is something that I know has been really important for those higher up at the FA. Sue Campbell, I know, has been big on driving that. And then last week as well, looking at the grassroots level, we had the Let Girls Play biggest ever football session, where we had 90,000 girls across the country playing some form of football in schools, which was something that colleagues of mine had led on, but something that we were all really passionate about. We know that, you know, one of the FA's strategic goals is to have football available in all schools across the country for girls, and you know, last week was a sign of what we can achieve. But we've got work to do, we know that, and that's why I'm here, that's why a lot of people are here, and it's interesting hearing Charlotte talk about the male kind of management that she sort of reported into, that sort of were the allies for her. The pleasure that I've got is that the three main people that I probably report into at the FA are women. Sue Campbell, obviously the director of women's football, Kelly Simmons, who's director of the women's professional game, and Louisa Fynes, who's my director of communications. So I've been quite fortunate that I've actually got female allies, and you talked about the mutual benefit and the elevation. I mean, Kelly has always been a massive advocate of the work that I've done. Kelly Smith, I know you guys heard from her, you know, this morning. You know, I interviewed Kelly in her living room in 2009. You know, this was at a time when, you know, there were no press officers, there wasn't any mainstream interest in the women's game, and you know, I took it upon myself to try and tell those stories of women's players, and did that for over 10 years before I joined the FA. So I guess what I've tried to do is bring my experience and my knowledge into the organisation, You know, there's faces that are familiar to me in the room, and certainly that are here today, and that's through networking, and that's through building those relationships and listening. You know, one of the things that I've wanted to do over the last decade is listen to women and what are the challenges that they face, and how can I help, not to bring them up, because I think, you know, you guys and the women that are here today, you do that yourselves, but it's how can we champion and how can we get further acknowledgement. And, you know, that's one of the things that I want to do working at the FA, is continuing to champion women, whether it's my colleagues, whether it's those people that, you know, those players that are playing in the Women's Super League or Championship, or those girls that are looking for a route into the game at grassroots level, like we had last week. You know, part of the Let Girls Play project last week, I was at a school which is literally a stone's throw away from Wembley Stadium. It was Raheem Sterling's school, I think it's Oakingham Manor it's called, and if you're in that playground, those girls running around kicking a football, if they looked up, you can see the Wembley Arch from the playground. I mean, that's what an aspiration and what a goal for them to be able one day play at Wembley Stadium, which is now a reality. You know, we have the Vitality Women's FA Cup final here every year now, which since 2015. And obviously there are England internationals that take place here. We also had one against Northern Ireland in the autumn. So, you know, we've got work to do. We know that. And, you know, but what I will say is that there is a real passionate group of people, and a lot of them are women. You know, I work with a lot of women in my day-to-day job, and I'm very much inspired and learn from them on a daily basis.
I think a lot of it is just about being a good person, isn't it? And it eventually will get to a point where gender doesn't matter, colour doesn't matter, etc., etc. Any of the intersectionality that Troy mentioned earlier. And speaking of Troy, I'm going to let you go.
I'm going to stay.
You're going to stay?
I'm going to miss my trip. Do you know why? Because they'll only talk about me when I'm gone. So.
That didn't take very much arm twisting, did it? In that case, I'm going to speak to Kieran about his pledge, because you pledged to get on side, which of course was launched by Women in Football last year. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've made a couple of pledges, and one of the big things that I've always wanted to do is use my knowledge, my network in the women's game to try and support those maybe starting out in the industry. So I mentor. So I've been mentoring a few young journalists for the last few years, and they've done amazingly well, and that is nothing down to me. All I do is offer an ear and make sure that I'm available to pick up the phone if they need me. But you know, one of them is working at The Athletic, another one has spent a 6-month internship at CNN. Some of you will know Flo Lloyd-Hughes. I mentored Flo for a little while, and now she's doing amazing, obviously works with you on Talk Sport. So yeah, so I always tell Flo that I'm the reason that she's got to where she is, but she's absolutely not. She has worked her socks off over the last few years and has done brilliantly, and was brave, because she was working in a secure job, you know, and decided to leave that and go freelance, and she's done amazingly well with that. So, you know, mentoring is something I'm really passionate about. I think if you can pass on your knowledge, pass on your network, and help open some doors, I think that's really important. So my most recent pledge last year was, you know, when I started out in the women's game, there were not enough women in the press box. When I was turning up for women's matches, to be honest, there wasn't many press, full stop, because as I said, when I started out, there was no mainstream interest, or very limited in mainstream interest. So I wanted to mentor the likes of Flo and some of the other journalists so that we would have more representation, and I worked the Continental Cup final last week at AFC Wimbledon, and I'm pretty confident in saying that there were far more women in the press box than there were men. So we have definitely made some ground in that area. The one area that we haven't made enough ground is there is not, I don't think there was one British Asian in that press box, and if there was, then it's completely escaped my mind, but we don't have enough British Asian representation in our sport, in our industry. I'm mixed race, I'm Sri Lankan English, and I think even I am, as a guy, there's not many of me either. So my pledge was to mentor a young, or a group of young female British Asian journalists looking to make their way into the industry. So I am mentoring one at the moment, but I am happy in saying that I will happily take on one or two more if there is any British Asian young female writers, journalists who are looking to make their way in the industry. Then I'm more than happy to have a conversation and try and support them in trying to achieve their their ambitions of working in football.
That's absolutely fantastic. If anybody is interested or knows anybody that's interested, make sure you just email the team at Women in Football and they'll put you in touch with Kieran. My pledge as well, very similar to Kieran's in terms of mentoring. Any woman who wants to get into football broadcasting, I put this out there when we started Get On Side in the first place. And I said I'd be launching it after I'd had my baby. My baby is now 5.5 months old. So it's out there. And the main point of me doing this is in the summer, obviously we have a home Women's Euros taking place, and I'm in the process of speaking with Talk Sport at the moment, where I predominantly work to get whoever I'm able to mentor when you get in touch with me to take you with us and see what we do at the Women's Euros. So again, just get in touch with the guys at Women in Football and they'll put you in touch with both me and Kieran as well. Right, going back to male allies, and bearing in mind Troy has kindly offered to stay with us. I hope you got an open ticket.
Don't throw me many questions.
Well, actually, what I'm wondering is, because I'm sure there are people in the room here who've got questions that they would rather have asked. So I wonder if there are any hands up who'd like to ask any questions. Hi.
Hi. Sure. My name is Katia, and I work for City Football Group, and I would like to ask a question actually to Troy, so thank you for staying.
No worries.
So my question goes, you were talking earlier about protected characteristics and disabilities and so on and so on. And for example, for me, I did a career move. So 1 year ago I was a nurse, and now I'm in football.
Okay.
And when I speak with women, it's like, oh, you're a hero, you're in the front line, blah, blah. When I speak to a male, it's a bit like, what's the nurse doing in football? Then I say I'm Portuguese, oh, that makes sense.
Oh.
And then I'm just like, how can we probably go a bit further down the line so we are seen by male mainly that we are actually fallible and we have a good skill set that allow us to be in this career coming from a female industry, let's call it that way, into a completely male industry. I hope that makes sense.
It's a brilliant question, one I wish that you didn't ask me because it's a tough one. You know, the problem with our game is that for far too long there's been this stereotypes around women, and the people that have accentuated those stereotypes still exist in the game, unfortunately. So because of that, their opinions and their views, the archaic opinion and views, are not going to change. We have to realise that. What I hope is that with the new wave of people that are coming into the game, with more understanding. Remember, football wasn't challenging those stereotypes even 10 years ago. It wasn't really challenging the stereotypes that you've presented today and many other stereotypes as well. It would just allow them to flourish. So for a very long time, they've gone unchallenged. But what I've seen, particularly over the last 3, 4, 5, Paul, you will probably tell me as well, is there's a change going on. And there's a change going on through awareness, through education, through conferences like this, and understanding more the difficulties that women will have entering into the game. And because I'd like to think that the people that you connect with and the age range of those people are changing. You know, we're seeing, look, I'm probably on the other side. I'm an old timer, but I have values and views that have existed for a very long time because of the stuff that I have received, you know. But I think that there is an opportunity now for football to change. And everyone says we've got to work at snail's pace. Well, that snail has been walking backwards for far too long. So we've now got to start, you know, escalating the conversations, which we are. This platform does that, and many other platforms do that. And we've got to start calling it out where we can, without fear. Now, I say without fear, and that's not easy, because particularly as a woman, how do you challenge someone who actually you feel is responsible or has that power to take you out of your role and then maybe send you back into somewhere? That is very difficult. And I suppose when I said I wasn't understanding the whole male ally thing, that's where it does come into play. And Charlotte probably explained it a lot better than what I could have done, but that's where it does come into play. One, because you know then that you've got someone who is not similar to you, who's willing to have that conversation on your behalf or challenge on your behalf. And two, then that will enable you to be free, hopefully, and be yourself in the environment. If you do have enough power and strength to challenge it yourself, make sure you've got some good people around you as well, because it's never easy. And it's never a one, don't do that again, and then it's all right, everything's fine. Do you know what I mean? But make sure you have good people around you. This connect here, women in football, is massive for any woman that's working in the industry. You know, and I've said some things earlier on where black and brown people, women, I think are still a topic that needs to be addressed. But I still believe in what women in football are trying to achieve, and still believe that as a support network, as a supporting system, here you are. So even if you haven't got it in your own environment, you know you've got an external environment that will benefit you as well. So listen, you're Portuguese, so everyone starts going Ronaldo, they start going, and all of that stuff. That's where that stereotype comes from, by the way, because all Portuguese people love Ronaldo and they want to be Ronaldo. Well, you're creating your own journey, you're creating your own kind of, you've made the transition. What an amazing transition that is. And hopefully you'll be able to land in this industry and excel because of the qualities that you have.
Can I add something to that as well? And I'd also say, think about why do you feel like you have to justify yourself? As I feel like as a woman in football, you're constantly justifying. It's that I think there was a film recently, the Do You Even Like Football, that I think The Athletic did, and it just hit the nerve and just hit
I
the
still get asked that now, but actually by other women as well. I find it astounding.
Think about why as Troy said, there may be a point where actually you don't necessarily want to challenge because they're more senior and you don't want to. It's not risk. Don't want to make a fuss. But actually, other times, if you're just talking to mates or you're just meeting someone for the first time and you get asked, but do you even like football? What do you know about football? Choose your arguments and think well, actually, you know why you're here, and don't feel that you have to justify yourself. And I think I spent a lot of my career justifying why I was there, and that I've supported Spurs since I was a kid, and of course I should go, And actually, you don't need to, and you're in your job because you're good at your job. And actually, it doesn't matter if you like football or not. You're in your job because you are good at your job. If you happen to like football, amazing. I know, what a great thing, but your value is your job first and foremost. Don't feel that you have to justify yourself while you're there, because you know yourself where you are.
Yeah, but you feel like you have to give validation, or get validation is what I should say. I'd quite like to tell you about the support that I've received at TalkSport. Because when I fell pregnant, I was so worried about telling my boss that I was pregnant, because in football, there are many of you in this room who I know have children and have really struggled with employers. The minute you say you're pregnant, that's it, career over, bang, you're not coming back, or you're coming back in a different guise you don't want to. And I say I plucked up the courage. I knew that I would get support from my boss at TalkSport, who's incredible. But I was really nervous going to speak to him, and he allayed my fears straight away the minute I went to tell him. And I told him just when I was 12 weeks pregnant, maybe 14 weeks actually. And he was amazing. He's like, okay, right, brilliant. Okay, you're still going to do the Euros though, aren't you? And that was his first thing. And I was like, and I immediately felt relaxed, because I was sitting there thinking, they're not going to want me to do the Euros. They're going to think they've got to wrap me in cotton wool and, not allow me to do anything. And that wasn't the case at all. And then, trying to go back into work as well, they gave me as much time as I wanted. They let me I'm freelance. I'm not employed as staff for TalkSport, and they kept the 3 main jobs that I do for TalkSport. They kept all of my shows open and my role as England correspondent open for whenever I wanted to come back. Now, a few years ago, that just would not have been possible. It's possible because we have a boss at TalkSport who has a wife, 2 daughters, similar to Paul. When your eyes are opened to the challenges that women face, you automatically become a male ally regardless. Because unfortunately, there are some men who live in a male-dominated world, and they've grown up in a male-dominated household, for example, and they don't know any better. And so education is really key, and that's where family, friends, and everything else are really, really important. So I wanted to tell you that story for anybody thinking of starting a family or anything like that the world is changing finally, and male allies and female allies are really key in helping in that. I'm wondering if anybody else has got any questions.
Yeah, Carol Coos from Hills and Reeve. I think those in the room that have got male allies are probably pretty fortunate, but that depends on individuals and having those connections. But what do the panel think about more sort of systematic change? Do we need positive action? Do we need something akin to a Rooney rule for, positions that come up, like coaches' positions within, female game? Should we be interviewing at least, one female? quotas for balls, something that actually, rather than best practice and code of conduct, should we be looking for something a bit more concrete?
I'll direct that to you, Paul.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Well, I think certainly going back to the sort of the pledges earlier, one of my pledges was to try and accelerate the number of women that we have in our club in executive positions, both at board level, executive committee level, women's board level, in our charitable trust. And there's a couple of reasons for doing that. One, because change is slow if you don't accelerate positively, and there's a balance because you don't want to over-promote people or put people in a position that they're not qualified to be in. But on the other hand, change will take too long if you don't sometimes take a risk on people that maybe not quite at the level that you might have hired in a situation where you were looking at everybody in exactly the same way. So we've done that, and we've been really pleasantly surprised by the results, not because we didn't think that the women we were putting into those positions were going to be good enough, but just that they've actually flourished quicker, even though they weren't quite necessarily as experienced as we would have liked them to be. And I think that's actually then given confidence to the next level of women who can see actually there isn't a glass ceiling, that there is an opportunity to go further, that they're not going to be out of their depth, that the men who perhaps were sitting alongside them were not going to be judgmental, that they weren't quite at the experience level or whatever. So I don't know whether it needs to be formalised. I just think it comes back to actually having leadership that is open-minded to the talent that's in the room. And the talent that's in the room is female as well as male. And, I think to Troy's point, if I'm being really honest, when I took up this role with however long ago it was now, 18 months, a couple of my so-called peers said, why? Why are you doing that? You don't need to do that. And that, to be honest, again, excuse the French here, it pissed me off. Because actually, more of us need to be doing it, not less. And we don't need to be challenged because we're doing it. And actually, when I reflected on it, after being a little bit pissed off, I was actually quite pleased. It enabled me to go back and say, look, I'll tell you why. Yeah. This is actually the reason why. And, you need to use a whiff phrase, you need to get on side with this. Because there's a ton of talent in my football club, let alone yours and all the others out there, that you're missing out on if your mind isn't open to what we're trying to do. So for me, sometimes your natural reaction to a challenge like that is perhaps the wrong one. You need to reflect on it and go back in a different way. And certainly I would say of the 2 or 3 people that did say why, at least 2 of them are like, you know what, you got a point. It took them a while, but you got a point. Now what I need to see from them is sitting alongside, Troy and Tira, just come and be part of it. But the most important thing is that change is happening, and I think one of the reasons why it seems to have accelerated in the last 4 or 5 years in football is because of the strength of women. Actually, finding a voice, finding a group that is prepared to back that voice, feeling more comfortable in the environment almost day by day, and then actually taking the chances when they come along. And if you look now across most football clubs, there is a woman who is in a senior position, who is basically a leader for every other woman in the club. But alongside them, somewhere in the club, I also hope there's a male creating those opportunities with the woman to make sure that it is a cohesive process and a consistent one. Because there's nothing worse than actually a woman just doing it on her own. For me, the whole male ally thing is that actually we're in this together. It's not about women for women or men for women. It's about all of us actually just finding the best talent and promoting it where we can.
I think that's a perfect way to end it, actually, Paul. And we can all play a part in that, that's for sure. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. You've got lunch next. I can't tell you exactly what time your next breakout session starts. We're a little bit behind, so maybe add half an hour onto the original timings you were given. But thanks so much, and thank you to our wonderful panel as well.